It's good to see you. I'm Alfred Perlman. I'm a railroad man.
My word! What an odd voice. Who on earth is that? That's you, boss. What? That sounds nothing like me. I'll have you know that I have one of the best voices known to man and God. And it sounds nothing like that. No, I'm pretty sure that's your actual voice.
Yeah, you see, the voice we're accustomed to is actually an exaggerated parody of your character. Not actually historically accurate in any way, simply played up for laughs to improve audience retention and make sure people stay around and actually learn something, and laugh at the same time. That was actually pretty thought-provoking for you, Barry. I've been going to school. I've learned a lot about, audiences, even if I don't know exactly what they are. Yeah, that's about what I expected. I want to know who authorized such a film to be made with my true, untainted voice, overdubbed with such blasphemy. Alfred Edward Perlman was born in St. Paul, Minnesota, on November 22nd, 1902. The son of a civil engineer, from a fairly young age, he actually quite enjoyed railroads. According to him, from the age of 8, he never wanted to be anything but a railroader, and his first job was indeed with Northern Pacific. He was an engine wiper and car cleaner at the age of 16. He worked there during summers while he paid his own way through college. He would graduate from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1923 with a degree in civil engineering. And after that, he would continue working with Northern Pacific until at least 1930. Perlman had a pretty respectable attitude regarding hard work. As he put it, the way to get to the top was to start at the bottom. Which sounds like common sense, but my point is that he didn't just walk in and become the most powerful man in a railroad company. He did a whole bunch of different jobs in the railroad industry, and more importantly knew what it was like to do the grunt work before he would become one of the suits, as some would call them. We already established he was a wiper and a cleaner, but he also worked as a track laborer, a draftsman, and in 1925 he would actually be promoted to Inspector of Icing Facilities at the St. Paul Yards. A year after that, he was actually named Assistant Superintendent for Bridges and Buildings, and his next promotion was to Roadmaster at Staples, Minnesota. In 1930, Northern Pacific actually sent him to Harvard Graduate School of Business Administration to study railroad management. His solid work ethic and ability to obtain promotions, and therefore earn the respect of his superiors, meant that he'd already distinguished himself to the company, and they were willing to fund his further education to make him one of the people in charge. He earned his MBA in 1931, and he returned to Northern Pacific as an assistant to the Vice President of Operations. That's right, gentlemen. It all takes a bit of hard work. Pull yourselves up by your bootstraps and go to work like you're supposed to. And one day, you could be just like me. I honestly don't think that particular motivational speech was nearly as effective as you think it is, boss. What are you talking about? What I am saying is that these dang kids, don't know what it's like to go out and actually work for a living. Yeah, it's hard, but you make progress, and you do it every single day. And you make more progress and more progress, contributing to the local economy, contributing to the world around you. And over time, it starts to benefit your own existence. And if you wind up focusing on doing something you love, then you'll never work a day in your life. But what's most important, gentlemen, is that you do something. Well, that part, I guess I can agree with. Now, speaking of doing something, where are those steam engines? Oh, no. In 1934, as the Great Depression was in full swing, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation actually borrowed Perlman as a consultant to aid in the financially struggling railroads. Perlman would analyze several lines at the RFC, including the Denver and Rio Grande Western. In 1936,
With that company struggling in receivership, Perlman actually signed on as an engineer in charge of their maintenance of way work. He would rise through their ranks all over again to become chief engineer in 1941 and then the general manager in 1948, followed by executive vice president from 1952 to 1954. At this point in the story, it's important to stress how good Perlman was at his job. He knew railroads inside and out, and more intrinsically, knew how to run one in an effective manner. Namely, one that generated profits, generated income, so the company could stay afloat, pay its workers, and run its trains. There are plenty of effective railroaders in the course of history, but Perlman was definitely in the top 10, bar none, in terms of his effectiveness. And his tenure at Rio Grande enhanced his reputation to a nationwide scale. He was a key figure on the management team and pulled the railroad out of bankruptcy. In 1947, the reorganization plan he helped put together allowed Rio Grande to pay dividends for the first time in 76 years. A massive victory for both the company and for Perlman's reputation. And he sparked an aggressive modernization plan, which would make Rio Grande one of the first roads to transition from steam locomotives to diesel electrics.
Yes, Rio Grande! Yes! Let's make sure we get rid of all those dastardly steam engines! Here he goes. The dark side of the coin has reared its ugly head. Very truly we are all lost in the grand scope of hell. Barry, are you alright? What? What's a steam engine? The steam engines, gentlemen! Scrap them!
Perlman's reforms did also include off-track maintenance machines, as well as the establishment of a research laboratory for what was then called test tube railroading. Perlman was a huge proponent of newer technologies and implementing them as soon as possible. Anything that could possibly improve efficiency, he wanted to be the first one in the door. He wanted to have it for whatever company he was working on because he was a forward-thinking guy, always thinking about long-term goals and sustainability for the companies he worked with, not just immediate profits. He wanted to make sure the company had the ability to last, and in order to do that, they had to adopt the future as soon as possible. During World War II, he also served as an engineering consultant for the Defense Plant Corporation in Las Vegas, Nevada. Then he helped plan improvements for Korean railroads in 1949 and Israeli railroads in 1950, doing overseas work. And then in the spring of 1954, Perlman was invited to come to the New York Central Railway by its then president, Robert R. Young, who had indeed heard of Perlman and his effective business strategies. It was the 1950s, so New York Central was on the downslope, as many railroads were. Young was also chairman of the board, and he asked Perlman to serve as president for the NYC, and help modernize and streamline their properties, as well as reorganizing personnel and operations. And Young himself was no slouch. He was incredibly good at his job too, but when he got control of New York Central, he found it in way worse condition than he initially thought. He needed the help, and Perlman started out strong, working on improving the Central's finances and reducing expenses overall, as well as, of course, modernizing the railway. And by that I mean, well, up to and including scrapping so many steam engines. Many would be rendered extinct by the action. Perlman directly ordered the scrapping of both the Niagaras and the Hudsons, with no remaining examples left, and he almost got rid of all the Mohawks, but two managed to survive. The 3001 would be traded to Texas and Pacific, and she would make it into preservation as a result. The other one is actually a bit more interesting, though. 2933 was used as a stationary steam boiler in the New York Central shops before being placed into storage, and she lasted until 1962 there. She probably would have been scrapped, but after a request was penned by the Kirkwood, Missouri museum director, it was donated to the National Museum of Transportation in St. Louis, Missouri, and personally presented by Perlman himself. Seriously, by that point a lot of New York Central's issues had been fixed, and the reason Perlman had been so strongly for scrapping the steam locomotives is they genuinely, desperately needed the scrap value. They really did. They couldn't afford to just give any of them away by his logic. It wasn't so much that Perlman hated preservation or hated steam locomotives at all. In reality, he was just looking out for New York Central, and he was making the best call from a business perspective, even if it wound up being very anti-preservation. But he did spare 2933, and she's still at the Museum of Transportation to this very day.
I did what? We didn't want to tell you that you were the one that did that. What? What did he do?
He spared a steam engine.
He did? I mean, I barely know what one is, but that doesn't sound like him.
I know it doesn't.
Was I drunk?
You might have been. I didn't really see a need to ask because I actually agreed with the decision.
I need to go to that museum right now and correct this mistake.
Sir, I don't think that'll be entirely necessary. I mean, is it really worth it?
Yes! Everything I do is for the company, and we need that scrap value. Do you know what that means, boys?
I think I know exactly what this means.
I want that steam engine!
Yep, there we go. Even with Perlman's help, New York Central did struggle quite a bit during this time, and Young was known to be suffering from clinical depression. When they were forced to suspend dividend payments in January of 1958, he couldn't take the stress anymore, and he took his own life at his home in Palm Beach, Florida. Perlman was left on his own and assumed Young's role within New York Central, but he wound up being able to handle it. Within 6 years, in fact, Perlman reduced Central's long-term debt by nearly $100 million. He reduced the passenger service deficit from $42 to $24.8 million, and by 1959 had increased earnings to $1.29 per share, which was double that of 1958. He wanted to create economically viable passenger traffic, and that did result in him getting a little crazy with his new technology ideas. He would permit the experimentation with the jet train of 1966, the M497, which had a General Electric jet engine on the blasted roof. It never entered proper service as it was only for experimentation, but it did give New York Central valuable data regarding high-speed performance, as it was blindingly fast. He also started looking into computerizing networks on the New York Central, and started investing in electronic classification yards. All this helped them save money in the long term because, again, Perlman's whole thing was thinking about the future. He wasn't as worried about how much money the company was going to make next month. He wanted to know how much money they were going to make in 10 years. He wanted to build a long-standing railroad that could keep going well after he was gone. Or as he put it himself in a very famous quote, which appeared in the New York Times on July 3rd, 1958, "After you've done a thing the same way for 2 years, look it over carefully. After 5 years, look at it with suspicion. And after 10 years, throw it away and start all over." His point was that everything is subject to change, and a company, like all things, needs to be able to change with the evolving times. And if they don't do that, they're almost guaranteed to fail. This element would become very relevant when New York Central wound up merging with the Pennsylvania Railroad to become Penn Central. Now, I've already done an entire video about how Penn Central went, and needless to say, it did not go well. They failed miserably within just a few years, but that had nothing to do with Perlman. If anything, he probably would have been able to fix it, but the problem was nobody was listening to him. Perlman had hired plenty of younger suits to fill in leadership roles, but the management for the Pennsylvania Railroad stubbornly refused to change anything they were doing. They still felt they could do railroading the same way they had been for the last 50 years. Perlman knew that wasn't true, and the evidence was quite clear since they were hemorrhaging money all over the place, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not convince them to actually, do anything about it that was really that helpful. He didn't even want to merge with the Pennsylvania Railroad at the time. He went along with it, but he never really agreed with it, as he felt that they were not in as good a shape as they advertised, and turns out he was absolutely correct. The merger was a disaster for both companies, and Penn Central would be the largest case of bankruptcy of its time. Though Perlman wasn't there for that, He was dismissed from Penn Central on June 8, 1970, after being forced into what was effectively a lame duck position, without any real authority at all. He found his reputation was still intact. He was hired to revitalize the Western Pacific Railroad, and he served as their president from December 1st, 1970 to December 31st, 1972, as well as chairman until 1976. During that time, he indeed completely turned the struggling line around, making them attractive enough, eventually, to be sold outright to Union Pacific on January 1st, 1983. Perlman would pass away not long after that happened, though. He died on April 30th, 1983, in San Francisco, California. He's still to this day remembered as one of the 10 most prominent railroad presidents of the 20th century. And even though he's often painted as a villain in the preservation community, it's important to understand that he didn't do it out of malice or hate. He did it because he had to, because that's the kind of boss he was. He did what was best for the company at any given time, ensuring that they would have a future, to be able to continue running, to be able to continue transporting, to be able to continue to have honest jobs for people so they could make an honest living. He knew what it was like to work the menial labor jobs of the railroads. He had been there and worked his way up. His life is, all in all, an American success story, showing the strengths of a good work ethic as well as a solid forward-thinking mindset. And in truth, despite my overzealous parodying of him, I actually greatly respect him, as I've always been fascinated with railroad management as well as business management in general. I've certainly done plenty of videos regarding managing businesses as well as economics, so seeing someone who was so genuinely good at it, who was never known to do anything illegal or unscrupulous in order to achieve it, is definitely worthy of praising. And at the end of the day, what more can be said other than, of course, I want that steam engine. Boss, please, why are you like this? For the company! For New York Central. Boys! And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders, Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitson 131-232, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Tommy Rossini, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Brian, Jack Carson's Row of Videos, Lord R444, Mark Holding, Murder Drones Doll, A-Person 723, DM Travel Typhoon, Royal Hudson 2860, Isurfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Red Lion, Ennis Productions 8104, Hannah Bird, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, The Baxter, Caleb Crosswhite, Ohio Trucker 1, Joshua Long, Andrew Bowen, Josh Johnson, Hayden DeGrow, Caleb Rainwaters, Prez Drenton, Master of None, Arizona Hot Rail, Liam Wright, Mr. Sleepy, and Dr. Racer 78. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.